Hello and welcome to the Moonshots Podcast. It's a huge, a ginormous, and a special edition. It's episode 29. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, and as always, I'm joined by the man himself, Mr. Chad Owen from Brooklyn, New York.
I can't contain my excitement tonight, Mike, because we have a very special guest with us today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce our third co-host for today's show?
Well, I am fired up because we have the Commonwealth Games here in Australia. Australia's winning tons of medals. And if there was ever a gold-winning Aussie startup entrepreneur and innovator, it has to be the man himself, Mr. Brendan Yell. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, great to be here.
Well, you and I are waving our Aussie flags at the moment. How do you think, Brendan, we can transform, our Brooklyn hipster? How can we make Chad a little Australian? What would he need? Would he need, a glass of beer while he watches the Commonwealth Games? Would he need an Akubra hat? How do we transform him to celebrate our Aussie special edition?
Oh, look, I think he would need a glass of beer washing down some Vegemite on toast. I think would go great.
Oh, there you go. Now I'm asking a rather controversial question here. Chad, have you ever tried this great Australian delicacy, Vegemite?
I have, and I can see why people like it. I'll give it that.
Okay. I think, Yelly, that's a firm no from Chad. I'm not sure we've sold him on that. What other Australian food delicacies could we maybe win him over with, Brendan?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Vegemite one's an interesting one. I like it myself, but I do understand why people taste it and think it tastes like alien mucus. So fully get that. I don't know. We got maybe some kangaroo steaks. We do love our kangaroos down here, and they are on the coins and the Australian notes, but we do actually eat them too. They're kind of tasty.
Yeah, well, we could obviously go. I've had crocodile pizza at an Australian restaurant. What about barramundi? Maybe we need to go a little bit upper class and get the barramundi fish on the grill going for Chad. What do you think?
Oh, look, a lovely fillet of barramundi is always super tasty. I can highly recommend it.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. And now, I am a former rugby player and rugby fan, so I feel like that gives me like a few points.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Rugby was a bit too tough for me, I'm afraid.
Well, I played fullback, so I was like as far away from the action in the scrum as possible.
I'm not sure. I think you lost your points again.
Okay, well now listen.
I have a good foot. I'll say that much. I could make those kicks.
There you go. Very good. Now, putting your best foot forward is definitely what the focus of this show is going to be. Chad, why don't you introduce for us the entrepreneur, the innovator that we're going to study, we're going to learn from today?
Yeah, so I think it's only fitting having two Aussies co-host the show today to profile an Australian entrepreneur. And we have a fantastic female co-founder of a pretty successful tech company, Melanie Perkins from Canva. And her story and her co-founder's story, she co-founded her first company with a guy named Cliff Obrecht. I think it's a really great origin story and just lesson in how to bootstrap a company to success, kind of in spite of yourself and struggles along the way.
Yeah, she brings, without doubt, a big theme we've seen on the show: tenacity, really focused on customer problems, and she's got this abundant positivity about her. She's really special. I know, Brendan, you've spent some time, you were interviewing one of her co-founders just last week when we were together. You're so familiar with this company. What's your sense, what's your views on Melanie and what she does best?
Well, I think when someone is trying to solve a very large problem, they can get a little focused on how do I solve this big problem. And what I love about Melanie is her ability to actually divide that down into a series of smaller problems. And every day she's just going to work and solving the smaller problems, but with the bigger goal at mind.
Yeah, and she's what I think a great example in is somebody who has been pretty fearless in seeing their dreams come true. So something that started in her mum's lounge room many, many years ago as a different company, in fact, has now reached 10 million active users. Literally more than 400 designs have been used on their graphical platform. And I think what makes the timing of this show so special is that they recently raised actually a small amount of capital, but it did take their total valuation to over $1 billion, which means that they are in the unicorn club, and they are the second startup from Australia who's made that list, and all from a young lady who has just overcome a ton of challenges. So it's a remarkable story of determination, isn't it?
Yeah, look, not only did Melanie come from the relatively small country of Australia, she came from the city of Perth. Now, Perth would be Australia's, I think, 5th largest city. So it's only got a population of about 1.8 million. It's reasonably small. And to do that and Perth is way over on the west coast of Australia. Like, there's not much over there and not many people. So I'll just add that to the mix, that she's done that from really a very, very small place.
Yeah. Now talking about Canva, this graphical tool that helps you make, social media posts, presentations. Chad, have you had a chance to see Canva in action? It's sort of a tool that could easily replace the likes of Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, maybe even Microsoft PowerPoint. When you hear about tools like this, are you excited? Do you think there's room for it? And what's your feeling about a product like Canva?
My first exposure was essentially getting lost in the product for about 2 hours. I mean, it's that engaging and cool and interesting. I think precisely because it sits at this intersection of a lot of entrenched older products, and it just reimagines it, and it's all in a browser, which I think no other company has done to date. Put all of these features into a product that is completely inside the browser, which to me is, why it is so highly valued, why it is set up for success.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the really big disruption came. We were finally free of these massive gigabyte installs from Adobe, and we could get a very lightweight product that could quickly produce content for a social era. And I feel that sets us up, Chad, to really kind of take our first dive into the clips. What have we got to lead things off?
Oh, just a nice little intro here to the Canva story and Melanie's story. So here we are hearing about the beginnings of Canva.
A young Sydney woman has achieved what millions only dream of. She has turned her idea for a web-based design company into a billion-dollar business. Based in Surrey Hills, the company Canva ran a loss last year. But it is now a global player with big backers and huge ambitions. Eleanor Quirk went to meet the woman behind the phenomenon.
They're the tech companies so valuable, they're almost mythical.
Unicorn was a term coined a couple of years ago over in Silicon Valley, and it means the company that's worth $1 billion.
Now, local startup Canva has become just the second Australian company to join the likes of Apple, Google and Uber in the exclusive club dubbed Unicorns. It's the brainchild of Melanie Perkins, who's built Canva up to be one of the world's most successful graphic design sites.
We've had a crazy number of designs created, over 400 million designs being created now across the globe.
One of those happy clients is Yvonne Hills, who credits Canva with her business success.
So just being able to get in there, do presentation, proposals, change an image that I want to put on my website. Within an instant, I can get it done.
It's been a 10-year journey to get Canva where it is today, one that couldn't have been made possible without investors like Rick Baker, as well as major investor Sequoia Capital and some other big names.
We've been very fortunate to have some incredible investors. For example, Lars Rasmussen, who co-founded Google Maps, was one of our earliest investors, alongside a few celebrities that you might have heard of, Woody Harrelson and Owen Wilson.
But it hasn't been without its hurdles, recording a $3.3 million loss only a year ago. The company's now hot on the heels of Australia's only other unicorn company, Atlassian, whose worth is now estimated at more than $11 billion.
Yeah, so what's so interesting, they're just launching launching into the stage right now and everyone's hearing about them. But Brendan, what's interesting, this has been a 10-year journey for Melanie and the Canva team, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's another one of those overnight successes. Look, I'm not a big fan of the term unicorn. I think a lot of startup founders get they talk about it and they're kind of obsessed by it. But what it does do for Canva, and it was mentioned in that clip, is it does give them a lot of attention and does put them on the world stage. And, I was in Singapore last week and people were like, oh, you're from Australia. Do you know the guys from Canva? So it definitely has given them a lot of exposure.
Do you feel that a lot of innovators or young entrepreneurs, say, who are starting on their journey, how many people do you really think are prepared for a 10-year marathon?
If you look at all of the great successes, I think Instagram's the only real exception where it was a very quick exit. Most, even just getting to the $100 million point has been, 8 to 10 year journey. If you look at all the VC funds, they all run generally on 10-year cycles. So, I think people watch movies like The Social Network or they hear the Instagram story and they just think, oh, I can just do this. I have this great idea that's so unique. But it's a long journey, and it's also a roller coaster. It's a roller coaster, month to month, week to week, some days even hour to hour. And it's a roller coaster both financially and also emotionally.
Yeah, the most interesting part of this story for me is the beginning and how Melanie started a company that you can see the seed of the idea of Canva, but it really was a much kind of simpler and more niched sort of company. But here is the story of the founding and beginnings of Fusion Book, hers and her co-founder Cliff's first startup venture.
When I was teaching graphic design programs, I would write a lot of instruction manuals on how to use the programs, and you'd have so many steps. So it's like step 1, click this button, step 2, click this button, etc., 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 for like 22 steps to do one simple action. And that just seemed completely insane. Why do people have to learn the software? The software should learn people.
In a more polite way, she was like, this is shit. Like, why do these tools still exist? In her head, there was just like, it was just super obvious. There's got to be a better way of doing this. Like, I can be the person that can do this.
In the very early stages, we had like 8 different concepts of different ways people could communicate their ideas, whether it's like through photo books or through all sorts of different other things.
It was very sort of conceptual, and I really didn't think it would go anywhere. But then Mel started getting really serious and like drawing up like product plans and doing real work behind it. And I was sort of like, yeah, I'll see where this goes.
Hello, so today is the 11th of July and this is our Minute Wednesday.
We always go very quickly from like, this is an idea to this is the thing that's going to happen.
And we are in a fun position at the moment. We're actually starting to really get a lot of traction.
So rather than trying to take on the entire world of design, we decided to take on school yearbooks in Australia.
Fusion Books was an online system that made it easy for school teachers to create yearbooks.
We had our entire family sitting there stuffing envelopes to send to every single school in Australia. We had like, my mum would be like licking the stickers and his dad would be sealing the envelopes and we'd have someone folding them.
I didn't want to just send these books out to schools that weren't any chance of like a lead. I started by calling them up and say, hey, can I please have the name of the yearbook coordinator? And they'd be like, no. I would end up like out-sassing the secretaries.
That wouldn't be something that I would endorse. I'm very like the truth.
I'd be like, yeah, I've got a book here and I really need to send it to the yearbook coordinator. They've registered for this book, but I don't have a name to address it to. And they'd be like, oh, send it to the office. I'm like, can't send it to the office. I'll just not send it. I don't really care. It doesn't bother me either way. And she's like, oh, hang on, let me find out who the person is. And I'd get straight through.
For 3 months a year, it would be like printing around the clock. It was in my mum's living room, and so she'd babysit the printers.
You'd hear the printers in the background. You're constantly listening. It was cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And you'd be like, I think the printer stopped. Because if the printer stops, then you're losing money.
The very first night that we had our new printer, it exploded everywhere. The cartridge hadn't been put in correctly, and so our entire room ended up in cartridge ink.
Oh my gosh. Now, they may have been in Perth, Brendan, but they had some New York hustle about them. What I take from that clip is these guys were bringing the family, they were printing in the living room, they were prepared to do anything it took to make this business a success.
Yeah, and it's really important. I think if you're a founder, that you have that drive and that ability just to work. Again, these startups. We look at this glamorous world of startups, but as it turns out, it isn't so glamorous, and it's just sometimes just really, really hard work.
Yeah, and the other thing that strikes me about the start of that clip is I remember in 1994 having Photoshop installed on my Windows Pentium 486 enhanced PC, and I have used Photoshop and Illustrator ever since. And I faced this problem, particularly with the Adobe suite, where you launch a new program, you're like, oh, this is too much for me to learn. Like, it's literally going to take weeks of YouTube videos and whatever to learn. So I don't use the tool. So I faced that same problem. But what's really powerful is that Melanie had this, well, there's got to be an easier way. Now, Chad, we've seen entrepreneurs before. We've seen them having this same aha, like, hang on, this shouldn't be this hard.
Yeah, I'm sure. Now, for those of us, above a certain age, we remember the 1,200 page books, that you would spend like $60 for, that, of course came with a little CD on how to learn these programs. Yeah, she was, I'm sure, sitting there kind of in a stack of these being like, there's got to be a better and easier way here. I think my favorite kind of solving your own problem story, of course, is Richard Branson in the Caribbean, stuck on an island trying to get to his girlfriend, and he just charters a plane, puts up a chalkboard and is like, all right, flights to Puerto Rico, I think it was $39. And the next day he was on the phone to Boeing to see about leasing, extra inventory. It's so interesting to me that, like you were saying, Brennan, it's like, yeah, it's one of those overnight successes, but if you dig behind the scenes, it took 10 years.
Yeah, the other unique thing about what they did, and generally with computer software and with anything, the more you're always between two forces. Is it powerful or is it easy to use? You can make something super powerful, let's say like Adobe Photoshop when we first came across it, but it was not that easy to use. And I'm sure I've got a, Photoshop for Dummies book somewhere in the house. But then, also you can make something super easy to use, but it's not very powerful or flexible. And somehow Melanie was able to figure out that there must be a better way to achieve that. And with Canva, it was basically delivering these high quality templates that were very customizable so that anyone without any design skills could actually make something look fantastic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And have the designer community behind it as well to continue to post the good designs. And for everyone, that was also my favorite thing when I was exploring the product, is you can see everyone else's published work and take the inspiration from that and incorporate it into your own.
And I think that the where that was so powerful is that not only did she find that problem that we were talking about, it's really that moment when you open up a complex graphical or video or audio piece of software and you're just like, oh my gosh, this looks so hard. And you just have that moment of dread. This is going to take me so long even to get the most simple things done. But what I think was really powerful is that by moving to the browser, she was able to really change the game, because delivering it all through the browser was a far cry from those huge CDs and the books you mentioned, Chad, those huge books that you needed to get through them. And this is this idea of really solving a problem and being pretty relentless in going out there and solving a real pain point. And we've got like the Branson-esque thing of having on your radar where the problems are and challenging the status quo there. But then the next thing that Melanie and the Canva team do is they really go about solving this problem. And in doing so, I think they create a huge opportunity, because Photoshop and Illustrator, it's for the few, it's for the serious graphical designer. But for the rest of us, the other 99% of us, there's this huge problem of wanting to create beautiful things. So let's now take a listen to Melanie talking about how they go about solving a problem.
I think there's a lot more emphasis put on raising capital than there necessarily needs to be. So when you're starting out, it's so important to be solving a problem, building a product that is a solution for a group of users who really care about it. I think that sometimes if you read the media and you see people with these big flashy numbers, it becomes the goal, and raising money becomes the goal as opposed to actually building a company that is solving a problem that people care about. And so firstly, I don't think that every company should be raising capital. And I think for us, it was actually a huge advantage not raising capital early on in the piece. So we had 5 years of being organically funded, where we got to learn all sorts of things about building a product, internationalizing, solving a problem, becoming profitable, which is a really unheard of thing in Silicon Valley, and a whole bunch of other things that if we went straight from being students to bring on a large amount of capital, it would have meant that we wouldn't have known exactly how to spend it or how to execute. And also raising money can be a time bomb. So unless your charts are looking like crazy good, you don't want to be having to pivot when you are building up the headcount, building up the burn. So when you raise capital, you really want to be able to just hit the ground running and start flying literally as a company immediately. So definitely, if you're thinking that raising capital is the first goal of your company, you might want to reassess things, because ideally what you'd be able to do is figure out a problem that you really think should be solved in the future. Find customers who passionately believe in this as well. Make sure that's a big group of people. And then make sure that the product that you create is actually solving the problem.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me to hear her kind of speak to the ills or the pitfalls of raising capital too early in the process. I think 5 years in Silicon Valley terms is like a lifetime to not raise funds. But her metaphor of funding as a ticking time bomb, I think, is a really, really powerful one, and one that people out there should think about, because it could be a double-edged sword.
Yeah, look, I just love that clip. One of the things she talks about there is that it's easy to get put off by reading about somebody else's flashy numbers. I mean, so often you see a startup article and say, 2 guys in Seattle just raised $100 million in an idea. And you read that and you're like, well, I've got an idea. Like, where's my $100 million? However, when you dig into the story, it's never actually the case. Like, there's an option to raise more money, or the founding team had like $3 billion exits. Like, it's never as simple as that. And there was a great quote or interview that I saw with Paul Hogan, the Australian actor, and he was asked, what is Hollywood like? And he said, it's a really strange place. He said, it's like a mining town, but at any one time, only about 5% of the people are going down the mine and getting the gold. And the other 95% are up on top of the ground talking about who's going down and getting the gold. And I feel that sometimes startup world can be a little bit like that, where we're all talking about who's raising and who's doing what, and we're actually not out there solving a problem.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy, and it's
I love it.
We're too busy talking about who's going down, and we're not actually solving customer problems.
And I would say to startup founders, hey, maybe just unsubscribe from TechCrunch for a month, or just don't get too obsessed. Like what Uber did last week is definitely it has had nothing to do with your IoT startup. So, I think we can spend too much time looking at what others are doing, and which means we're not focused on what we're doing.
Yeah. I wanted to dig in a little bit on this one, which is, she's basically framing this idea that capital can be a misunderstood thing, and it can be a huge constraint. And I think for our listeners, it's really good we take a moment here to get into what we've seen happen and why actually it's sort of a double-edged sword. So here's what I would propose. Particularly in my time in San Francisco, what I saw was a lot of raising of capital from founders who didn't understand that the whole premise that someone invests in your company is based upon the fact that they want to put money in and then they want to get money out. Now, the way the money comes out, if they invest in your company, is through a liquidation moment. It's a moment where you either are bought, you go IPO, you are an acqui-hire. There's all these different models, essentially the selling of the company or a part of the company. Now, in order to sell the company, you need to hit a series of metrics, a series of very measurable things in order to create this liquidation moment. And sometimes those things run contrary to the ambition of a founder. And you get this almighty tension that the investor group, we want our money, and the founders are like, but we need more money to do what we really want to do. And all of a sudden you have this conflict where expectations are no longer aligned. But in the end of the day, those who put the money in often call the shots. Has that been what you've seen, Brendan?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think founders that raise early, what they don't realize until they actually take the money is that they've actually added another layer of pressure onto what they're doing. There's enough pressure already to try and get a product out the door, to find some sort of product market fit or traction. Now they've got a shareholder and a board, potential and board members as well that are hitting on them every month saying, where are you at? They're applying a lot of pressure. And it's just another thing that the founder has to worry about. And, I think at that early stage, keeping things as simple as possible is a really good thing. And, I think, I went down the path of an IPO many years ago, and I realized that I didn't want to do that because I'd started my company because I wanted to be my own boss, not because I wanted $100 million. So, I didn't go down that path when I started to realize, oh my God, there's all this pressure. I've got lawyers to answer to and accountants and audits and all these layers. It can be just overwhelming. Now, certain founders can cope with that. But, if you do it too early, it can just be really distracting, I think, as well.
So, Chad, have you seen startups raise capital at a good time? And is there something we can maybe learn from Canva, from what you're hearing when thinking about raising capital?
I think the companies that have best used their capital are the ones that take funding take serious funding like a Series A after they've found some semblance of product market fit or some real traction. Now, I understand that there are some exceptions to these kinds of rules and generalizations, but for me, it's having found that product market fit. Like I just don't see, if you're spending someone else's money to find how to solve your customer's problem, you're doing something wrong, like really wrong.
Yeah,
in my mind.
So I think what you're saying is the best time to raise money seems to be more when it's a growth story rather than a maybe story.
Yeah, I personally think it's the entrepreneur's job to do themselves with their own resources and capital that they can accrue kind of amongst themselves and family and friends. It's their job to find the product market fit. And I think that's what smart VCs do, is they wait until the company has found that product market fit, and then they can add in those resources. But the market can get frothy. It can be somewhat of a bubble maybe, and people are just kind of throwing money around willy-nilly.
And what we've seen here is like a clear story of bootstrapping, which really means just using very limited funding, being very scrappy, just making it happen on the smell of an oily rag, has benefited Canva massively. There is obviously the fact that they run a lean business, which is just good practice. And from a more strategic point of view, I'm sure they've not had to dilute their equity as founders as much because they waited so long. They had such a good story. I mean, Fusion Books was a profitable company well before they raised. So this sets them up for great success. Now, but Chad, you've mentioned product market fit, and the great news from a founder like Melanie at Canva, we've actually got the opportunity to listen to her thoughts about how you actually find product market fit, how you make sure that the thing that you're making serves to relieve the pains of your customers and to create gains for them. So let's now take a listen to Melanie Perkins talking about product market fit.
The best way to position your company for future success, I think, is that if you imagine an industry in 10 or 20 years' time, and then you make sure that your company is in the direction of the waves, then you're going to be well positioned. So, and then on the same note, what you want to do is address a customer's problem really succinctly. So there's a certain group of people that really have this problem, and if you can address that as your first port of call, that means that you're going to have a ready market. So rather than just trying to think of something out of under the sun, there's like, you know, certain crossroads, something that's going to inevitably happen. So for example, when I was thinking about the world of design, it became very apparent that it was going to be online. Like everything was moving online. It was not even something that you could contest, I think. And then everything is going to become collaborative. People are working together when they're trying to design a project or a product. And so they actually need to have that friction removed. So if you can kind of get along, you know, some really important trends and waves, it means you're going to be well positioned going forward.
The key for me about product market fit is to use a tool called the value proposition canvas, which is a tool that's out of the lean canvas, and it makes you sit down and say, what are the pains that my customer experiences? What are the gains they're looking for? And can I answer those? And this is traditionally where we find the real discussion about whether you've got a thriving, huge opportunity or whether you're sort of solving. Sometimes the classic thing is solving a problem that's too small, solving a problem that people don't care about enough, or just solving a problem that people will just not pay for. So the great opportunity that we can take from this is that it's all about understanding the pains and gains of your customers and meeting those. And the key to meeting those is what we call validation. Don't just assume that you are meeting the needs of your customer, serving their pains and gains, but you actually have to validate it. And Chad, you know my favorite one, it's prototyping, right? Mm-hmm. You know, get in there and actually create the experience face-to-face with the customer and see how they use it, see how they actually explore and go through the product. And actually, this is the greatest source of validation. Obviously, you can use surveys and you can look at metrics. But once you have that, you can then position it on what Melanie was really talking about is tailwinds. She saw a huge migration to online, and she was like, well, hang on. I have a feeling here that this is going to be huge, and we certainly know at the time Adobe wasn't thinking about doing it. They've since, started a bit of a catch-up game with our friends at Canva, but I really, really like the idea. You solve the problem, you meet the pains and the gains of your customer, and position within these tailwinds of things that are coming down the track. This to me is a great learning on how Canva has now got itself on a huge wave of opportunity. So Chad, when you think about product market fit, it sounds like there's a few learnings there. Do you think you've got now a couple of key things about when you know you have it? You know, you were asking like, when do you know you've got it? Do you think that's the list, or is there anything else you think you can add to the signs of product market fit?
I don't know that I have anything personally to add, but this is a question actually that I would love to take into our future episodes as we unpack learnings from other founders, because it's not something we've talked much about up until now. But I think the story of Canva is so interesting in that, of course, it's one of those stories where it's like, yeah, of course, design is moving online, and of course, design is becoming collaborative. It's just she and her team knew that a little before us and committed to making that happen. And then that's why this, she's riding the waves, as she says, of that trend.
Yeah, and if you actually look at what we've already learned, it's a 10-year story in the making. It's not overnight. They bootstrapped like crazy with exploding printer cartridges in their lounge rooms. It was a family affair. She was highly focused on solving a problem, and she got this product market fit. She got momentum. She rode the tailwinds, and they were already, and it was very nice that they were serving almost a micro niche of just school yearbooks. But that enabled them to go so deep now that they can just expand with all that learning into multiple different practices. I know they're covering use cases around weddings, corporate presentations, whatever visual merchandise you might need there. They seem to they seem to have an answer. So what an action-packed first half of the show. And it's important to remember we've got a lot of other things coming. And in particular, how they build a team, how they manage talent at Canva, and some of the big future opportunities for them down the track. But before we get into all of that, I feel that, Chad, you've got a little bit of a documentary that you want to chat about. So why don't you set up, instead of a book recommendation, we've got an innovation documentary from Chad.
Yeah, some really awesome filmmakers from Portland actually made a documentary called The New Hustle. And it profiles 3 Australian companies. So for all you Australian listeners, this is a must watch for all of you. They profile, of course, Canva and Melanie Perkins' story, but also 2 other companies that I hadn't been familiar with. Vino Mofo, that is, I'm guessing, probably the largest or one of the largest online wine retailers in the region. And then Safety Culture, an interesting company that is harnessing the power of digital checklists to just make work safer and better across, I think it's, at least 10 or 20 million teams all across the globe. And it was just fascinating for me to hear both a uniquely Australian perspective, but also learn how it's not unique. It's just, Australian entrepreneurs have the same problems and face the same struggles that we all do. But there's some really interesting, in one of the clips, the Fusion Books clip came from that documentary. So you get some really interesting and personal stories from the documentary. And so while I wasn't familiar with these companies, I'm sure that you, Mike, or Brendan, have at least heard of these companies.
Yeah, well, we should let Brendan do this because, a little bit of background on Brendan. Not only does he run all of the community development across Asia Pacific for SendGrid, he's also run one of the biggest accelerators, the Qantas Avro Accelerator. He's the Sydney director of Startup Grind. He's a mentor at Murudi. I mean, this guy was even at CompuServe. Wait for this, Chad. 1991, Brendan was there. So if anyone knows the startup scene here in Australia, it's definitely Brendan. So I think, Brendan, you're rather familiar with these guys.
Yeah, so the CEO and co-founder of Vino Mofo, Andre, was my best friend going through high school, and I spent a lot of time watching some of his fabulous failures, watching then the pain that bestowed on his wife and family. But of course, now they just kept changing it until they finally hit something that worked. So I think probably one of the most interesting parts of this documentary is that it actually interviews some of the partners of the founders and just what the family goes through when they have to ride this roller coaster journey of a startup. Safety Culture, another great Australian success, came out of the tiny town of Townsville in far north Queensland. So, hey, you think you can do a startup from anywhere? I think Safety Culture probably proves that you can. So a great documentary, not too long. I can highly recommend it.
Fantastic. I mean, it's so great to see, Chab, that whether we're in Europe, whether we're in San Fran or New York or Sydney, Australia, there's this whole movement of people who've now got tools to make their dreams come true, to go out, solve customer problems. It's a super exciting time. And we've got 5 more lessons to come from Melanie Perkins. Now we're going to pivot across more into how they build teams, how they recruit talent, how they do a whole bunch of stuff. So there's plenty more to come for everybody listening. And I want to remind everyone, if you want to get more info on this particular show or any of the others, just go to moonshots.io and you'll find all the information in the world. So you can always go there. It's like a repository of all the goodies. But now it's time to throw ourselves into this second installment of the show. What's next for us, Chad, as we continue into a journey on Canva and Melanie Perkins?
One of the more interesting stories from the documentary, The New Hustle, was her early struggles to build a product team. and a tech team. She and her co-founders found, hey, we can pay Indian developers 1/5 or 1/6, what we're paying developers here. We can get 5 times as much work done. And what happened was they ended up with a front end that looked kind of pretty, but the back end was so broken that they literally took screenshots of the yearbooks that their customers had created and recreated it in Photoshop because their back end of the product was so broken. And so this is kind of a hard lesson learned about finding the right talent. But here's actually a clip from Melanie in her own words talking about finding talent.
And he said that if I could find a technical team and co-founder, he'd be happy to invest. And so that set off this crazy whirlwind of learning about entrepreneurship and startups and venture capital, because even though we'd had a company for a few years, we'd never heard about startups. And so everything was like just being submerged into another whole world. So I ended up spending 3 months there, meeting a whole bunch of people, learning and reading as much as I possibly could. And during that time, actually was introduced to Lars Rasmussen, who founded Google Maps and Google Wave. And he has been absolutely instrumental for us, because he said, didn't seem instrumental at the time, it was very annoying because he would keep rejecting all the people that I brought to him to be on our technical team. And that went on for a full year before we found the right people. But in the end, we've ended up with the most amazing technical team. And it was because of that slightly frustrating experience that it turned out so well. I think we've got the most amazing team here now. So when we're hiring our team members, firstly, we have an extremely high technical bar because we need the best of the best working on our product, because it has such big reach. Like, we've now got 4 million users who've created over 30 million designs, which is completely crazy. And so having the people that can actually realize that dream and vision technically is really important. But then also people need to be passionate and motivated by what we're trying to achieve here. They need to be go-getters. So people that, if there's a barrier, it just means you need to climb over it or under it or however way you need to go just to get through it. It's really important that people are not the sort of person that just wants to sit back and let things happen, because if you do that, things never happen. So it's really important that people are motivated and determined and passionate.
Finding talent, one of the all-time greatest challenges, not only for startups. I have to say all the Fortune 500 companies I work for are, looking at digitization and innovation, thinking, oh my gosh, we face a huge talent deficit in those areas. So I think it's not only startups that face it, but I think all companies, particularly in such times of great change. Brendan, I want to ask you, where do you see the talent challenge for the companies that you've met, the companies you've been part of? Where is it getting? Where's the greatest talent challenge? You often hear the technical founder one that Melanie spoke to. That's often one. But what else do you see as being the great talent challenges? And what do you see the ones that do it well? What are they doing? What can we learn?
Well, the first problem that Melanie talks about there is that founder team. And I think that obviously has to be right from the very beginning. And I imagine that when Cliff and Melanie met with Cameron, who became their CTO and is now their chief product officer and third co-founder, they would have had to really sell him on the vision in a similar way that they sell to customers. So they would have had to be able to communicate very succinctly where they were going, what their big goal was, and how they were going to do it. Again, in a similar way that they do to investors. So I think for Canva, they got that founding team right. Cameron, he'd worked with Lars Rasmussen on Google Wave. I assume that was where the connection came from. Google Wave, obviously this mythical kind of Google product, sort of Slack of the future that didn't quite take off. But Cameron was very technically sound, more of a front-end developer than a back-end developer. But on weekends, he used to do designs and sell them at the markets and sell them online. So we had this great thing where he had this great sort of user interface skill. It was his day job, but on the weekends, he loved playing with design. So he had that great interest in the product as well, which made him a perfect fit for the team. When I founded shopfree.com, I had a co-founder that lasted about a week. And what I did was I hired someone exactly like me. If you go to a barbecue, we want to invite someone to a barbecue, sure, invite some people like yourself. If you want to start a company, Invite people that have the opposite or complementary skill sets to yourself. And that was where I got it wrong. And I think what Cliff and Melanie and Cameron have in their founding team is a really fantastic complementary skill sets.
I would also say, Chad, that when you look at the role of finding co-founders, I mean, apart from solving a big problem and being pretty passionate about it, I think finding co-founders has to be one of the most, important things a CEO or founder can have. And I just look at the success of lots of the different entrepreneurs that we've looked at. And there's very, very often there's a team of people around them. Even the mythical Steve Jobs, it was revealed on our show, had a whole crew of people around him. Some we know, like Jonathan Ive, some we still do not know of. But the reality is, like, finding talent and recruiting a co-founder are essential, aren't they?
Yeah, and I don't know that I have heard of anyone that has gotten this right from the beginning, which is why it's so nice to hear the failure that Melanie and Cliff had. But like, it has a happy ending. They found Cameron, and the product speaks for itself now. But I'm even struggling, and I'm sure many of the listeners are struggling with this right now, of who am I best meant to work with? Who am I best meant to manage? There's so many different levels to it. I feel like this is something that I personally just struggle with on a daily basis. And the people that fit right into what I do and who can do great work with me, those are people that, I'm never going to get rid of if I don't have to. Yeah. But, there have been stories where, maybe I was working with someone for too long and didn't realize that it was a bad fit until maybe it was a little too late.
Sounds like Brendan didn't have that challenge. He may have picked somebody.
I'm very envious of the 1 week trial period. Like, I wish it was that for me.
What, Brendan, if we think out loud here, I've got like a little running checklist. Like, you fundamentally want to co-found something. Like, I think about co-founding Moonshots with Chad. I just like Chad. I like hanging out with Chad. I've worked with Chad for years and years and years. It felt so easy for us to get together. So I think you don't have to be like besties, but you gotta really like the person. You gotta like the idea of sitting down and having a coffee and just hanging out with them is a joy. The idea of going to the pub, having a beer, it's a joy. Don't have to be besties, but I think you got to like them. And I think the other thing is that comes to my mind, and then Brendan, I need you to help me on this. I think absolute clarity on expectations. Where I see co-founders working really well together is that not only like each other, my gosh, are they explicitly clear on their expectations of the entrepreneurial vehicle, of the business? Are we trying to get rich? Are we doing it because we love it? Are we doing it because we need to pay the mortgage? It doesn't matter what that is, but the fact that everybody's on the same page. So when things get hard, everybody's still fighting for the same.
Yeah, look, and I'll throw another word there that's sort of similar to clarity, which is honesty. I think it's important to be super honest, not only with your co-founder and your founding team, but actually honest with yourself, so that you know what? I know I'm really good at this stuff. I'm really good at big picture strategy. But you know what? I'm really bad with the money and the detail. So you know what? I'm going to be really honest with my co-founder and say, look, I got this bit covered, but I think you could help me out with this bit. You have that attention to detail that perhaps I lack, or the other way around. So I think that clarity of why you're in it, but also that honesty about your own skill sets, I think is crucial. Otherwise, I don't think it can work.
Yeah, I'm going to even expand on that and say, like, honesty and candor, just like the willingness to talk about those things, because there's a lot of kind of deception by just simply not saying anything. And, there's a lot of things that can go unsaid in a partnership. And so I think that candor is also important as well.
I think one of the things we learned in the Amsterdam live show, Chad, was, do you remember I don't remember which of the entrepreneurs it was, but we talked about never skipping the weekly leadership or management meeting, because you need time and space just to be open. And management teams often neglect these things because they're too busy for the management meeting. But if you're just not talking, if you're not in the ritual of talking openly and creating space for conversation, this is the beginning of the infection, because you can't have alignment if you're not talking as co-founders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike, are we talking about startups here, or are we talking about marriages? It's kind of the same thing. And you often hear founders talk about, hey, it's very similar to a marriage. We've got a job to do. That might be raising kids, but there's money involved and there's emotional layers. We've got to communicate. We've got to make sure we're on the same page. Like, it's, I think if we go back and listen to the last 30 seconds of what we're saying, we really could have been talking about marriages.
Yeah. And so to give you an idea, my two co-founding partners in Qualitance, the three of us have 3 conference calls a week with just the three of us talking through different aspects of the business in an effort to create high synchronization, because it's busy. We're on all different continents of the world. We have over 200 staff running around. Like, there's a lot going on. And, sometimes you start those calls and go, I wonder what we're going to talk about. And then before you know it, the hour's gone and it feels like there's 10 things that didn't even get talked about, which are still on the list.
Absolutely. And then the other thing, guys, is I also spent 5 years working with this little Australian rock band called In Excess. Now, In Excess were 5 guys from the northern beaches of Sydney who were just mucking around, playing gigs at their friends' birthday parties. And then they decided, are we going to do this properly or not? And they decided that they wanted to be the biggest band in the world. And they achieved that when, I think it's about 25 years ago now, they played to 100,000 people at Wembley Stadium. Now, hanging out with these guys was super interesting because there was effectively 6 co-founders in this group. And even though there was 3 brothers in that band, and you'd never pick them from personality or looks or anything, they all had their different roles. They had the front man, they had the sales guy, they had the creative guy, they had the mediator, they had the larrikin, and they had the guy that just reminded them they were living their dream. They all had these different roles to fill, and somehow they made it work.
What a great analogy. We've taken co-founding a company to marriage to rock bands, and frankly, there's another thing around talent and co-founders is that a lot of the success of band is formed in the early years when they often live and tour and work together, almost is 24/7. But this creates this essential understanding and connection that will power the band over the future. And that's, again, very similar to great startups, where you see founders coming together in a very intense way in those early years. And one of the things that's coming back about Melanie is this is a long road. It's taken them over 10 years to get to where they are now. They started in her mum's house in Perth, Australia. And what's so important is if you're going to last and be successful over those 10 years, you have to have resilience. And Melanie has a lot of wisdom to share around this idea of not giving up. When you face a hurdle, don't give up. And when things go wrong, don't be dejected. Just keep on going. So let's have a listen now to Melanie Perkins from Canva talking about rejection.
Being able to start to deal with rejection and failure. And that is something that I don't naturally deal with very well because I just keep trying until it works, which I guess is how I deal with rejection and failure. And so I think that you need to somewhat change your model. So a lot of people, if they're rejected once, they'll be like, I shouldn't do that because I was rejected, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't successful. But I think it's really important to realize that rejection is actually just a step towards success. And so, literally, if you get a piece of paper and you draw 100 circles, and then every time you're rejected, you draw a cross on one of those circles, and it's not until you get to the 100th circle that maybe you should change tact. You just have to keep trying and trying and trying, and sometimes it will take you years to literally get to that final circle where something works. And it's so important because I think that any startup journey is going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of rejections. And the world isn't made to people to succeed in startups, because the world sort of is going along in its own pace, doing its own thing, and you're trying to go exactly against the grain, against every company that already exists, against what is the standard traditional path. And so it's so important to be able to build up that sense of self-confidence and to realize that rejection is just a part of the journey, and that every time you fail, it means that you are just getting closer to an eventual yes.
I love the 100 circles, and Melanie's going out in search of rejections so that she can mark the X's. Again, I think that is possibly a uniquely entrepreneurial trait. I think that's a frame of mind that really only entrepreneurs and good entrepreneurs have, is the reframe of failure or rejection into, nope, that's a learning. It's on my way to the promised land.
Yeah, that resilience just seems essential when your dreams are big, when you're going out in the world with a radical new way of doing something that maybe people don't understand. There's resistance from the status quo, all of that sort of stuff. Rejection is just getting you closer to success. Do you see, how do you see young founders dealing with this, Brendan? Do you see that resilience is something that it's by nature, or do you think it's something that they can learn and maybe it's more of a nurture thing as well?
Oh, it's a great question. Look, resilience is probably my favorite word in startup world. If I had to put one word on a wall in a co-work space with startups, it'd be resilience. Now, look, not everyone has it these days. Particularly the millennials, they're kind of growing up in, a different world where they're, getting medals for participation and everyone's a winner, and hey, you can be whatever you want to be. I mean, I wanted to be a professional golfer when I was a kid, and I got to a pretty good level, but I had to actually, at a point in time, go, you know what, I'm just not good enough to be a professional golfer. When I launched ShopFree in 1999, it had been going about a month. I felt I was going well. We're getting about 1,000 users signing up a day. And someone went to the contact form and they wrote, "I don't know why you're bothering. ShopFree sucks." And I was like, wow. And I thought I was perhaps a little bit more resilient than the average, perhaps millennial founder that can be a very resilient these days. It really hurt. It really, really hurt. I thought, why would someone go to the effort to tell me my product sucked? And I wrote this long-winded reply to a non-existent Hotmail address. Felt like I got it off my chest, but you know what? That actually grew a little layer of resilience, just like a coat. And I think it happened. It happened again over the years, but it'd be like each time it happened, I put on another coat. And as long as I realized that I still believed in what I was doing, that enough people were liking it and coming back and sending me more nice emails than ShopFree sucks emails, you know what? I just had to go with that. But resilience, it's a really important thing. It'll get to you sometimes, right? The most resilient founder will occasionally have a moment in the fetal position on the office floor when things don't go right. But that's the journey of a startup founder. But you know what? Over time, you get more and more resilient, and hopefully success and some traction breeds some confidence and breeds resilience as well.
Gosh, I mean, Chad, can you imagine? We've not had a Brendan moment where someone has written to us and told us that the show sucks, that they don't know why you're bothering. But how do you kind of process this idea of resilience? How do you look to turn it around and use it for yourself and in your everyday challenges?
It's hard,
yeah,
because it can cut deep, like you said, Brendan. The criticism or failures, abject failures, can really hurt. It can hurt the business financially. You can lose trust of customers, and look at what Facebook's going through right now. Is Mark Zuckerberg is testifying to Congress. Like, that was a huge breach of trust by him. And my hope is that he doesn't put on this face to try and make everything seem hunky dory at Facebook. I actually hope that he and the team really look and see how they can fix the product to make it better and win back the trust of customers. So for me, and this is a practice that I've just recently started, that I picked up actually from Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater, the hedge fund. He has this amazing book called Life and Work Principles. But one of his big things is, after a failure or a setback, objectively take a look at it and then sort of create a rule for yourself that incorporates that learning. That's like, when this happens, I will do this. And it's really just as simple as that. For me, that kind of codifies the learning of the failures, so that as entrepreneurs and in startups, we always talk about increasing the rate of learning. I think if we don't document it and write it down, we're not going to kind of keep that and learn from that. And so that's just something that I've done very recently that I think is helping me, build that resiliency muscle to be better after each and every setback.
What about you, Brendan? I mean, you have this insane travel schedule. You have a family. You're involved in so many different activities, adventures. What do you do when you face adversity and you're looking to get through it? What are some of the things that you do?
Yeah, look, I'm an incredibly reflective person. So I'm always thinking, this week, how did I do? The conference I attended in Singapore last week, did I do a good job? Did I network well? Did I meet the right people? So I'm always sort of reflective in a very honest way. I'm never very public about it, but just internally, I think I'm always very reflective. I mean, as a startup founder, you have to wear a lot of hats, especially in the early days. Some days you're designing an interface, and other days you might be looking at some code, or you're writing a press release, and you can't be good at all of those things. Now, you're going to have failures, not of the Mark Zuckerberg, recent kind of failure to deal with. And it's interesting to see how he goes, because he's had a pretty sort of rosy run to date. But you're going to have small failures. You're going to go, I wrote this press release and it kind of sucked and didn't really, no one ran with it. Or you're going to have those little failures as well. They're not going to be big, oh my God, our biggest client, we just lost all their data kind of failures, but there'll be little ones along the way. And I think it's important to take as much learnings from those little ones as you do the big ones.
There seems to be a thing, whether you look at Ray Dalio, and we'll put a link to him in the show notes for all the listeners on moonshots.io. But I go back to a show we did, Chad, on FedEx, Fred Smith. And he had a lot of time in the military before he founded FedEx. But he talked about, you sort of come to grips with a problem or a crisis, you kind of stoically go through it, but then you sort of get over it, put it in a box and move on. And he had I think this is a shared thing. You look at Ray Dalio, you look at Fred Smith, it's really about once you've admitted there's a problem, once you've embraced the problem, it puts you in a position where you can get over it, put it in a box, and the moving on and asking yourself, what have I learned and what would I do different? And I love what you said, Chad. You talked about developing habits that just trigger when you face a challenge, you kick in with a series of things. And I love those little habits. One of the things that I do, whether it's for resilience or just well-being, is whenever I work outside from being inside, I always take 3 large breaths just to center myself, suck it in. And it's just one of these things that I was taught in San Francisco as a way of just clearing your mind and getting ready for sort of this next chapter. I love these sort of practices, and it's something that so many great innovators have, these little hacks that help them transition between challenge and then moving back into going forward and an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think Fred Smith was talking about it in the frame of learning from history. The perspective that all this has happened before, either outside my company or inside my company, and what can I learn from that? Which I feel like is a very stoic philosophy, and it's also echoed by Ray Dalio in his book. And again, it's great for me to hear from all of these founders, but I don't know. I had a particular affinity for Melanie and her story, because I think we're probably exactly the same age. And, I fell so much in love with the product to hear that her struggles are very similar and the same as someone like a Fred Smith or Richard Branson tells me, you and I are kind of onto something in decoding all of the learnings from these entrepreneurs and innovators that we've been profiling here on the Moonshots podcast.
Yeah, and I wanted to call out the fact that we've seen this very stoic theme of, the obstacle is the way. if you're experiencing hardship, then you know you're doing the right thing. And I'm just so blown away, Brendan, that theme, if you encapsulate it in one word, is resilience. And this is just something that you see as the one word for all startups. How do you best advise or coach people when you see people who don't have enough resilience? What do you do, Brendan? Like, how do you help them?
I don't come across that as much. Look, the people that aren't resilient, the first time they hit a bump, they're kind of gone, right? They just, it's too hard. I couldn't raise any money. That was my problem. You hear that, right? They generally don't hang around too long. I do see sometimes the other way, where people sort of confuse resilience with sort of blind, bold stupidity, going off into the darkness when you're like, dude, no one wants this, right? Or no one's prepared to pay for it. Like the data is telling you it doesn't work, right? It's not working, and you're paying $100 for every customer you're making $5 from. Like it's not working. So I think it's important for founders not to confuse those two things. Right. Resilience means you dust yourself off, you get up, you look for a solution to solve a problem. You don't sort of just sit there and cry and go, it's all too hard. It's not blindly going into the darkness when everyone, when everything else is telling you that it's not going to work, So, hey, look, occasionally we get founders, they go off in the darkness and they come out the light on the other side, and we go, wow, well done, didn't see that coming. But, there's a difference between resilience and just that blind, bold stupidity.
Yeah, and I think if you as we talked about earlier, you're stubborn on vision but flexible on the details, the how you get there, right? This is a great path, and I think to bring us to our last clip of the show, Chad, I think that all that resilience, determination, all that problem solving that Melanie Perkins has showed is setting Canva up for a big future, right?
Yeah, I mean, they are calling out Microsoft and PowerPoint as something that they want to eliminate or kill or get rid of or make obsolete. So here's in her own words, Melanie's plans for Canva versus PowerPoint.
And one really fun thing that we're going to double down on, we think that Microsoft PowerPoint is so old school, and it was built before the days of the internet. We're so excited to see what we can do by completely reimagining the way PowerPoint, the way presentations should be done, and bringing it up to what should be happening today, making it interactive, making it collaborative.
For me, the fact that PowerPoint was created before the internet and it hasn't been reinvented since is kind of a crying shame. But that's why a founder like Melanie and a company like Canva is so exciting, and why it's getting so much traction.
Yeah, and you know what? Who hasn't had an awful PowerPoint experience? Yet once again, she's sensing problems. She wants to make design democratic and something that everyone can do. Not groovy turtleneck wearing dudes. And again, she's one step ahead, because you hear that and you go, oh, like even Google Slides is so much better than PowerPoint, but still not perfect. And the fact that she's already suggesting that this is the next thing, I wonder, like, Brendan, if you were to reimagine PowerPoint, I mean, what could there be?
Well, I mean, while I like Google Slides over PowerPoint, it still doesn't handle audio at all. You have to, if you want to drop a video in, it has to be a YouTube video, nothing else. So they're kind of, they've had to play the safe route. And what I love about Canva coming in is they can just, take a blank canvas, to use a term, and just start from the beginning and say, how would you do this if you invented it today? Which to me is the definition of disruption. It's not incremental things. It's like, okay, how would you do this if there was nothing else out there already? How would you do this? And that, for me, is the way the true disruptors think. Yeah,
I mean, it almost sets us up for some sort of, kiosk-based, rich media, carousel-like extravaganza that is as free of, the Microsoft templates that we were shackled in our early careers by. Just such an exciting company. And it's just really great to see that she's brought us some new clarity, I think, Chad, with this whole product marketing fit. I mean, she's really called that out as a key part of their success. But I got to love all that bootstrapping, that, solving a problem for the customer, relentless in seeking the right people. Every rejection is a step towards success. She really had, once again, it's another entrepreneur who, when you dig in there are so many lessons for us, right?
Yeah. I think that the 10-year bootstrap story is my favorite. I've been running my business for 10 years, and I feel like just now I'm finally achieving the success, that I had hoped for so many years ago. And just being encouraged that they knew that if they built a product that people really wanted to use, that they wouldn't have to take funding, and they didn't for 5 years. And here they are after 10 years as a $1 billion company.
Yeah, it's a great story. What Brendan, what's got you the most excited about Canva's future?
It was funny because I know some friends that have invested in Canva, and I questioned the $1 billion valuation based on revenues recently. Late night over some pizza and red wine, and they just kept coming back to me saying, "You've got to meet the team. You've got to meet the team." So, getting that founding team right, and plus, add a good dose of resilience, and I think it's easy.
I think what's really clear is that they are pointing to a future that is, they're not looking to Adobe and Microsoft to acquire them. They look like they're doing the classic, no, we're going solo.
When I interviewed Cameron Adams last week in Sydney, I asked him that question, and he said, no, everyone's on board for the complete vision. We're not looking to sell out to an Adobe or Microsoft.
Wow.
I have no idea what a Microsoft or Adobe would do with them. I mean, they kind of epitomize the opposite of open and collaborative, which is what Canva is going for.
Well, that's so sharp. I mean, culturally, that's why it would be such a tough proposition. From a publicly listed company point of view, particularly on the Adobe side, they run the very big risk of being the kings of design, brackets, old school professional. And Canva could be the democratizer of video, much like YouTube has done to the television industry. I think this is on the cards. So you could see them thinking about they have their own competitive products, but culturally, will they ever be able to nurture products like that when they do, as you quite rightly said, they come from a totally different world, don't they?
Yeah, well, when these acquisitions happen, obviously innovation tends to stop. But this situation of Canva reminds me a little bit of Yahoo when they rejected Facebook when they rejected the $1 billion offer from Yahoo. Zap said that quite a few people left at that point in time, thinking that was crazy. We should have taken that offer. And he said everyone that was left, they were in for the full vision. And I think maybe Canva feels like they're in a similar position now.
Yes, actually, that's right, Chad, isn't it? We heard that when we did the Zuckerberg show. He spoke about that being one of the toughest moments. Probably he's going through another one of those right now. But that was one of the toughest moments because he said there was a huge talent drain, like tons of people left.
Yeah. I think for Canva, the fact that Melanie and the team knew very early on that it was about bringing design to the masses, and everything they've done, both in the product and how they've run the company, has been towards that aim and that goal.
Yeah. So there you go. So much to learn from bootstrapping right through to just democratizing design. It's all there from Melanie Perkins and the Canva team. Brendan, you've done your first Moonshots podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show. How was it decoding such a familiar entrepreneur and company? What was that like for you?
Look, it was a heap of fun. I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of Australian startups going to global markets. So to dissect this one was just a great fun. And thanks for having me, guys. Hopefully, you'll have me again one time in the future.
Of course, we will. What is the triggering moment, Chad? Do you think it will be the third unicorn that we bring Brendan Yell as a return guest?
No, we'll bring him back sooner than that. But I can't let you go, Brendan, without soliciting some suggestions from you on who you think innovators, entrepreneurs, and companies that Mike and I should profile going forward? We've got Yvonne Chenard from Patagonia coming up, but who else do you think would be useful for us to unpack and decode and learn from?
Look, I think there'll be a number of ones out there. To be honest, I'm quite a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk. And I know he's a different kind of entrepreneur and founder in his own right, but I think his journey is an interesting one, especially when it comes to resilience. He does have that, obviously, or New York or New Jersey hustle. I think he's a very interesting character. And I would see if we can dissect Gary. That would be fun.
Man, cool. He's not on our list, so we'll have to add him.
Thank you. Yeah. So a big call out to all our listeners around the world, from Minneapolis to Amsterdam to Bucharest. We just love all of your feedback. We love your suggestions. You can get everything you need about the show from moonshots.io. Obviously, we're slipping into your favorite podcatcher, whether it's on iTunes or one of those other groovy applications on your smartphone. But remember, you can go check us out on the website. You can grab all our content as well on Facebook. We're sort of omni-channel, as they say in the groovy marketing world. But we really do need your suggestions, your feedback to keep coming in. And we really do look forward to the next couple of shows. We're going to look at the founder of Patagonia. Sounds like we're doing Gary Vaynerchuk, thanks to Brendan Yell. So much to look forward to. So Chad, Brendan, thank you guys so much for another great show, our Aussie themed show. I think it would only be appropriate that as we sign off, we put a bit of bread in the toaster, get out the Vegemite, and celebrate all that good entrepreneurial energy coming from down under the land of Australia. So on that note, Chad, thank you. Did you enjoy the show?
Yeah. Is it too much for me to say good day, mate?
Mate, I tell you what, if you're not half Romanian, you're definitely half Australian with a good day, mate. Yelly, so good to finally get you on the show. It's so great to be back in Australia and seeing all the magic that you're doing. Thank you ever so much, mate. Did you have a bit of a blast?
Hey, that was a heap of fun. Hey, and if there are any startup founders that are coming down to Sydney, I'll put some snags on the barbecue for you.
There you go. So on that note, I'm going to sign off, get my Vegemite toast going, throw a shrimp on the barbie, and have a schooner to you all, our listeners. Thanks very much. That's it from the Moonshots Podcast. That's a wrap.